The thundering hooves of a stolen horse echoed across the vast Montana plains as Winifred Ellis fled, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small satchel of belongings. The year was 1878, and she had just escaped a fate worse than death marriage to a man 3 times her age who had purchased her like cattle from her debt-ridden uncle. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the rugged landscape as Winifred pushed her mount harder, constantly glancing over her shoulder. Her uncle's men would be coming for her. She knew this land held no mercy for a woman alone, but anything seemed better than returning to Billings and the arranged marriage that awaited her there. "Just a little farther," she whispered to the exhausted bay mare beneath her. "We'll find somewhere safe before nightfall." But as the terrain grew increasingly rocky and the trail narrowed along a steep ridge, disaster struck. The mare, already pushed beyond her limits, stumbled on loose shale. Winifred felt the horse falter beneath her, and then they were falling. She was thrown clear, tumbling painfully through brush and over rocks until she came to rest against a gnarled juniper. Dazed and bruised, she struggled to her feet only to see her horse limp away, disappearing into the gathering dusk. "No!" she called out, but her voice merely scattered across the emptiness. Alone now, with the temperature dropping rapidly, Winifred gathered her courage and began to pick her way down the rocky slope, hoping to find shelter before the bitter cold of the high country night set in. Her dress was torn, her hands scratched and bleeding, but she pressed forward. Just as darkness completely enveloped the landscape, she noticed something unusual, a thin wisp of smoke rising from what appeared to be a small cabin nestled against the base of a rocky outcropping. Hope surged within her, and she hastened toward it, ignoring the pain in her ankle and the throbbing of her bruised ribs. As she approached the cabin, she noticed something unusual. The door stood partially open, and no lamplight shone from within. The smoke she had seen came not from a cheerful hearth, but from the dying embers of a fire that had been left untended. Caution made her pause at the threshold. "Hello?" she called out. "Is anyone there? I'm in need of assistance." When no answer came, Winifred cautiously stepped inside, allowing her eyes to adjust to the dimness. The cabin was small but well built, with a single room containing a bed, table, and stove. It was the sort of place a trapper or lone prospector might maintain. But her attention was immediately drawn to a dark form on the floor near the bed, a man lying motionless. She rushed to his side, kneeling beside him. He was alive but unconscious. His breathing labored. In the faint light, she could make out his features' strong jaw covered in several days' worth of beard, weathered skin, and a face that spoke of hardship and determination. His clothes were those of a working cowboy, worn denim, leather chaps, and a dusty bandana around his neck. Near his hand lay his hat, a battered Stetson, that had seen many years of sun and rain. But most concerning was the unnatural angle of his left leg and the dried blood matting his hair on the right side of his head. "Sir," she said, touching his shoulder gently, "can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, revealing a startling shade of blue that seemed to pierce through the dimness. For a moment, confusion clouded his gaze, then alarm. He tried to sit up, but fell back with a grunt of pain. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice rough from disuse. "My name is Winifred Ellis. I was traveling, and my horse threw me. I saw your cabin." She didn't mention her flight or her pursuers. "You're hurt badly? What happened?" The man's laugh was bitter and ended in a wince. "Fell off the damn mountain is what happened. Horse spooked at a rattler, sent me over the edge. Managed to crawl back here. But my leg's busted sure as hell." "How long have you been like this?" Winifred asked, already moving to the stove to build up the fire. 3 days, maybe 4. Lost track." His eyes followed her movements warily. "Listen, miss, you should go. This ain't no place for a lady, and I'm in no condition to play host." Winifred paused in her task, turning to look at him squarely. "And where exactly would you suggest I go, mister?" "Dawson, Wade Dawson." He grimaced as he shifted position slightly. "And anywhere but here. There's a settlement about 15 miles northeast. You could make it by tomorrow if you leave at first light." Winifred resumed building the fire, her movements efficient and determined. "Mr. Dawson, I'm not leaving a man to die alone in the wilderness. I've had some experience with nursing. I helped care for wounded men during a cholera outbreak in St. Louis 2 years ago." "I said go," he repeated more firmly. "I don't need your help." Winifred straightened, dusting off her hands after getting the fire properly stoked. She turned to him with an expression that brooked no argument. "I'll go when you can walk, Mr. Dawson. Not before." Wade stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to determine if she was serious. Finally, he closed his eyes. "Suit yourself. But don't say I didn't warn you." Throughout the first night, Winifred tended to the injured cowboy as best she could. She found clean cloths in a basin, washing the wound on his head and examining his broken leg. The break was clean, but the limb had begun to swell alarmingly. "I need to set this," she told him, her voice calm despite her inner uncertainty. "It will hurt terribly." Wade's face was pale and damp with sweat, but he nodded. "Wouldn't be the first time. There's whiskey in that cabinet." Winifred retrieved the bottle and handed it to him. He took several long swallows before nodding that he was ready. She found 2 straight pieces of wood to use as splints and tore strips from one of his spare shirts to bind them. "On the count of 3, she said, positioning herself at his leg. 1. She pulled sharply on the leg before reaching 2, causing Wade to let out a hoarse shout that turned into a string of curses. The bone shifted back into place with a sickening sound that made Winifred's stomach turn, but she maintained her composure as she quickly secured the splints. "You said on 3, Wade gasped when he could speak again. "Everyone tenses on 3, she replied, tying the last knot. "It's easier this way." A ghost of a smile touched his lips before pain overwhelmed him again. "You're something else, Miss Ellis." By dawn, Wade had fallen into a fitful sleep, and Winifred took the opportunity to explore the cabin more thoroughly. It was sparse but clean, with a small store of provisions that would last them perhaps a week if they were careful. There were hunting rifles and a pistol, ammunition, and basic tools. Outside, she found a small lean-to stable, empty now, but ready for a horse. A stream ran nearby, providing fresh water. As she stood outside watching the sunrise paint the distant mountains with gold, Winifred considered her situation. She was a fugitive with no home to return to. Her uncle would not forgive her defiance, and the man he had arranged for her to marry, Bartholomew Jenkins. A cattle baron with a reputation for cruelty would see her rebellion as a challenge to be broken rather than a reason to seek another bride. Yet here she was, tending to a stranger in a remote cabin, with winter approaching and supplies limited. It was madness, perhaps, but for the first time in months, Winifred felt a sense of purpose. When she returned inside, Wade was awake and watching the door with the intensity of a man accustomed to danger. "I thought you might have come to your senses and left," he said. "I told you my conditions for leaving," she replied, moving to check his splint. "How's the pain this morning?" "Bearable." His eyes narrowed as he studied her face. "You're running from something." It wasn't a question, and Winifred didn't treat it as one. "We all have our reasons for being in the wilderness, Mr. Dawson." "Wade," he corrected. "If you're fixing to play nursemaid till I'm dancing a jig, we might as well use given names." "Very well, Wade. I'm Winifred, though most call me Winnie." "Winnie," he repeated, as if testing how it felt on his tongue. "It suits you." Their first days together established a fragile routine. Winifred tended to Wade's injuries, prepared simple meals from his stores, and kept the cabin in order. Wade, for his part, seemed to vacillate between grudging acceptance of her help and stubborn insistence that she should leave for her own safety. On the 3rd morning, as she changed the bandage on his head wound, he caught her wrist gently. "Why are you really staying, Winnie? You don't know me from Adam." Winifred hesitated, then sat back on her heels. "Perhaps I need somewhere to be, as much as you need someone to help you." "You're running from the law?" She laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise them both. "No, nothing so dramatic. I'm running from a man who believes he can purchase me along with my uncle's debts." Wade's expression darkened. "An arranged marriage?" "A business transaction," she corrected. "Mr. Jenkins needs a wife to make him respectable, and my uncle needs money to save his failing business. I was merely the commodity being traded." "So you took off?" "I did." She resumed her work on his bandage. "I have an aunt in Oregon who might take me in, but I needed to put distance between myself and Billings first." Wade was quiet for a moment. "Jenkins? Not Bartholomew Jenkins?" Winifred's hands stilled. You know him? Know of him? He's got one of the biggest spreads in the territory. Also has a reputation for how he treats those who cross him. A chill ran through Winifred. Then you understand why I couldn't stay. I understand why you shouldn't be anywhere near me, Wade said grimly. If he's got men looking for you, this is the last place you want to be found. Are you a wanted man, Wade Dawson? Winifred asked directly. He held her gaze. Not by the law, but there are men who wouldn't mind seeing me in the ground. That describes most men out here, I imagine. She finished with the bandage and stood. I'm going to fetch more water. As days turned into a week, Winifred and Wade fell into a rhythm that felt almost domestic. She learned that he was 32, had been riding the range since he was 16, and had worked as everything from a drover to a ranch foreman. He'd come to Montana 3 years ago after some trouble in Wyoming that he didn't elaborate on. The cabin belonged to an old trapper who had died the previous winter. Wade had been using it as a base while he worked for various ranches in the region. For her part, Winifred shared stories of growing up in St. Louis, the daughter of a schoolteacher father, and a mother who had come from Boston society but chose love over position. Both parents had died in the cholera epidemic that had eventually brought Winifred west to live with her uncle. You have education, Wade observed one evening, as she read to him from one of the few books in the cabin, a worn copy of The Last of the Mohicans. Some, she acknowledged. My father believed girls should be educated the same as boys. My mother taught me the social graces she thought I would need. And now you're hiding in a cabin with a broken cowboy. There was something like regret in his voice. Now I'm making my own choices, she corrected. As his strength slowly returned, Wade began to instruct Winifred on survival in the wilderness. He taught her how to handle his Henry rifle, how to clean and cook the rabbits she managed to trap, and how to read weather signs in the sky. Winter comes early up here, he warned as they sat outside the cabin one crisp afternoon in late September. Wade had progressed to moving around with a crudely fashioned crutch, though the pain still etched lines around his eyes. Those clouds to the north mean snow within the week. Winifred followed his gaze to the distant mountains where dark clouds were gathering. We have enough supplies to last through winter? Wade raised an eyebrow at the "we," but didn't comment on it. Not nearly. I need to get down to the settlement before the passes close. Stock up properly. You're not ready for such a journey, she protested, which is why you should go. His blue eyes held hers steadily. Take the rifle, follow the creek northeast. 2 days walking will bring you to Clearwater. You can get supplies, maybe find work for the winter. And leave you here alone, unable to hunt or gather wood? Winifred shook her head. That's not happening, Wade. His frustration was evident. Damn it, woman! Why are you so stubborn? I made a promise, she said simply. I'll go when you can walk. I can walk, he insisted, gesturing at his crutch. Properly, she amended. Without pain. The argument might have continued, but they were interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats, multiple horses approaching from the south. Wade's reaction was immediate. He grabbed Winifred's arm, pulling her inside the cabin. Get the rifle, he ordered in a low voice, reaching for his pistol. And stay back from the windows. Heart pounding, Winifred did as he said, watching as Wade positioned himself by the window, peering cautiously through a gap in the curtain. 4 riders, he murmured, coming up the trail directly. Jenkins' men, she whispered. Could be just travelers. But his tense posture suggested he didn't believe that. The riders came into full view, 4 men, all armed, their horses lathered from hard riding. The leader, a tall man with a shock of red hair beneath his hat, reined in about 30 yards from the cabin. Hello, the house, he called. Anybody home? Wade and Winifred exchanged glances. There was no hiding the smoke from the chimney or the other signs of habitation. Stay back, Wade whispered, then raised his voice. State your business? Just looking for a young lady, the red-haired man replied. Runaway from Billings, brown hair, green eyes, about 20 years old. Name's Winifred Ellis. Her uncle's mighty worried. Winifred felt cold fear grip her heart. These were indeed Jenkins's men, sent to retrieve his property. Wade's face was grim as he looked at her. Go out the back, he said quietly. There's a path that leads up into the rocks. Hide there until they're gone." "I won't leave you to face them alone," she protested. "Winnie, please." His voice was urgent. "I can handle this, but not if I'm worrying about you." The determination in his eyes convinced her. With a nod, she slipped toward the back of the cabin, taking the rifle with her. Through the rear window, she could see the path Wade had mentioned, a narrow trail leading up into a jumble of boulders where a person could easily conceal themselves. Before she could reach the door, however, a shot rang out, shattering the front window. Wade ducked down, cursing. "We know she's in there, mister," the red-haired man shouted. "Send her out, and there won't be any trouble." "Nobody here but me," Wade called back, "and I don't take kindly to people shooting at my home." Another shot cracked, this one splintering the doorframe. "Last chance," the man warned. "Mr. Jenkins wants his bride-to-be, and he pays us to deliver, not to be gentle." Wade glanced at Winifred, who stood frozen by the back door. "Go," he mouthed silently. Making a split-second decision, Winifred moved to his side instead, setting the rifle within his reach. "We face them together," she whispered. "I won't have your death on my conscience." Before Wade could argue, the front door burst open, kicked in by one of the men. Wade fired immediately, and the man fell backward with a cry of pain. The red-haired leader returned fire, forcing Wade and Winifred to take cover behind a heavy table they had overturned. "You're making a mistake, cowboy," the leader called. "This ain't your fight." "Seems like you made it my fight when you shot up my home," Wade replied, grimacing as he shifted position to aim the rifle. The standoff continued for tense minutes, with occasional shots exchanged. Wade managed to wound another of the men, but he was at a disadvantage with his injury limiting his mobility. "They'll rush us soon," he murmured to Winifred. "When they do, I'll create a distraction. You run out the back." "Wade." "No arguments," he cut her off. "I can't outrun them, but you can." Before they could say more, something arced through the broken window, a flaming torch that landed on the bed, instantly igniting the dry bedding. Smoke began to fill the small cabin. "Come out now, or burn!" the leader shouted. Wade met Winifred's terrified gaze. "Go!" he insisted. "Now!" This time, she obeyed, scrambling toward the back door, as Wade provided covering fire. She burst outside, running for the rocky path, even as she heard shouts behind her. A bullet kicked up dirt near her feet, but she didn't stop, driven by pure survival instinct. Reaching the rocks, she ducked behind a large boulder, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. Below, she could see the cabin now fully engulfed in the flames. There was no sign of Wade or the men, and fear clutched at her heart. Then movement caught her eye. Wade, limping heavily without his crutch, making his way along the side of the cabin, using the smoke as cover. The red-haired man spotted him too and raised his gun, but Winifred was faster. Taking careful aim with the pistol Wade had pressed into her hand as they parted, she fired. Her shot went wide but distracted the man long enough for Wade to disappear into the trees at the edge of the clearing. The three remaining men spread out, searching, but the growing darkness and the confusion of the fire worked in Wade's favor. Winifred remained hidden, watching anxiously as the men eventually gave up their search, returning to their horses. The red-haired leader looked up toward the rocks, his face visible in the glow of the burning cabin. "We know you're out there, Miss Ellis," he called. "We'll find you. Mr. Jenkins always gets what he wants." With that ominous warning, they rode away, leaving the cabin to burn to the ground. Winifred waited until she was certain they were gone, then began making her way down from her hiding place, calling softly for Wade. For agonizing minutes there was no response, and she feared the worst. Then a low whistle came from the trees to her right. Following the sound, she found Wade leaning against a pine tree, his face streaked with soot and his breathing labored. "You're alive!" she breathed, relief washing over her as she rushed to his side. "Barely," he admitted, "but we can't stay here. They might circle back." "You can't travel far," she pointed out, noticing how he couldn't put any weight on his injured leg. "We don't have a choice." He gestured toward a barely visible trail that wound deeper into the forest. "There's an old line shack about 3 miles up. Trappers use it sometimes. It's not much, but it'll keep us alive tonight." The journey was grueling. Winifred supported Wade as best she could, but he was a large man, and his weight against her smaller frame made progress slow and painful. Night had fully fallen by the time they reached the line shack, little more than 4 walls and a roof, with a small wood stove and a crude bunk built into one wall. Exhausted, they collapsed inside. Winifred helped Wade onto the bunk, then set about starting a fire in the stove with the meager supply of wood stacked in one corner. The autumn night was cold at this elevation, and neither of them had proper coats. "They'll be back," Wade said once they had warmed somewhat. "If not tonight, then tomorrow. Will they find this place? Eventually?" He shifted, wincing as the movement jarred his leg. The splint had been damaged in their escape, and fresh blood stained his pants. "We need to keep moving at first light." Winifred sat beside him on the edge of the bunk. "This is my fault," she said quietly. "I brought this danger to you." Wade surprised her by taking her hand. His touch was warm despite the cold. "You didn't ask for any of this, Winnie, and I've been in worse spots." "Have you?" she asked, attempting a smile. "Well, maybe not worse," he admitted, "but close." They spent the night huddled together for warmth, the small stove providing minimal heat with the limited wood they dared to burn. By morning, Winifred had made a decision. "I'm going to turn myself in," she announced as she rebandaged Wade's leg. "Like hell you are," he responded immediately. "Be reasonable, Wade. You're injured, we have no supplies, and winter is coming. If I go with them, at least you'll have a chance." His eyes flashed with anger. "Is that what you think of me? That I'd let you sacrifice yourself to save my hide?" "It's not about that," she argued. "It's about survival. One of us might make it this way." Wade caught her wrist, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Listen to me carefully, Winnie. I've spent most of my life looking out for number one. But the day you walked into my cabin and decided to stay when any sensible person would have left me to die, something changed. I'm not letting you go back to a man who thinks he can buy a wife." The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "What choice do we have?" "We keep moving," he said firmly. "Together." The determination in his voice stirred something in Winifred hope, perhaps. Or simply the relief of not facing her fate alone. Either way, she nodded her agreement. They left at dawn, following game trails through increasingly dense forest. Wade fashioned a new crutch from a sturdy branch. And though progress was slow, they managed to put several miles between themselves and the line shack by midday. The terrain was growing more difficult, however, and Wade's strength was clearly failing. His face was pale beneath the stubble that had grown into a short beard, and a fine sheen of sweat covered his brow, despite the cool temperature. "We need to rest," Winifred insisted when he stumbled for the third time. "Not yet," he gasped, leaning heavily on the crutch. "Need to reach the high meadow before dark." But even as he spoke, his good leg buckled beneath him, and he sank to the ground with a groan of pain. Winifred knelt beside him, alarmed by the heat radiating from his skin when she touched his forehead. "You're burning with fever," she said. "The wound must be infected." Wade didn't argue, which worried her more than anything else. "There's a cave," he murmured, his eyes unfocused. "Half a mile ahead. Used to store pelts there." Winifred helped him to his feet again, bearing as much of his weight as she could. They staggered forward, Wade's directions becoming increasingly disjointed as the fever took stronger hold. By the time they found the cave, a shallow depression in a rocky hillside, partially hidden by scrub brush, Wade was barely conscious. Winifred managed to get him inside and situated on the dry stone floor before collecting branches to conceal the entrance. Night was falling rapidly, bringing with it a biting cold that penetrated the cave despite its shelter. Without a fire, they would suffer greatly, but Winifred feared the smoke would give away their position. In the end, necessity won out. Wade's fever was dangerously high, and they would freeze without warmth. She gathered what dry wood and brush she could find, creating a small fire near the cave entrance where the smoke would dissipate somewhat through the brush covering. Then she turned her attention to Wade, removing his boot and cutting away his pant leg to examine the break. What she found made her heart sink. The skin around the break was angry red and hot to the touch, with telltale streaks beginning to spread upward. Blood poisoning was setting in. "How bad?" Wade asked, his voice a raspy whisper. Winifred couldn't bring herself to lie. "It's infected. Without proper medicine." He nodded, understanding what she couldn't say. "In my pocket," he managed. "Map." Confused, she searched his coat pockets until she found a folded piece of paper, a rough map of the territory, with several locations marked in pencil. Bottom right, Wade directed. Circle. She found the marquee indicated a small circle labeled McAllister's, about 10 miles northeast of their approximate location. Who is McAllister? She asked. Doctor, Wade replied, his eyes drifting closed. Retired. Has a place up here to avoid people. Treats Indians, outlaws, anyone who needs it. Hope flared in Winifred's chest. A doctor? 10 miles from here? Wade nodded weakly. Go at first light. Get help. I can't leave you, she protested. Have to. His hand found hers, squeezing with what little strength he had left. Only chance. Through the night, Winifred battled Wade's fever with damp cloths cooled in the snow that had begun to fall outside. She kept the fire small but constant, melting snow for water and trying to coax Wade to drink whenever he was conscious enough to do so. By morning, she knew she had no choice. His breathing was shallow, his skin alternating between burning hot and alarmingly cold. Without medical help, he would die within days, perhaps hours. As dawn broke, casting a pale gray light through the brush covering the cave entrance, Winifred prepared to leave. She made sure Wade was as comfortable as possible, leaving the water pouch within his reach and building up the fire one last time. I'll be back with help, she promised, touching his face gently. His eyes flickered open briefly, focusing on her with effort. Be careful, he whispered. I will. She hesitated, then leaned down and pressed her lips to his forehead in a gesture that surprised them both. Wait for me. The journey was arduous. The snowfall had become heavier overnight, blanketing the forest floor with several inches that concealed rocks and holes. Using the map and the compass she'd found in Wade's coat, Winifred pushed northeast, trying to maintain a steady pace while conserving her strength. The cold was biting, seeping through her inadequate clothing and numbing her fingers and toes. Several times she stumbled, once falling into a snow-covered stream that soaked her to the knees. But the thought of Wade, alone and dying in the cave, drove her forward. By mid-afternoon, the snow had stopped, but clouds hung low and threatening. Winifred's legs burned with fatigue, and hunger gnawed at her stomach. She had brought nothing to eat, prioritizing speed over provisions. Just as despair began to creep in, the trees thinned, revealing a small valley nestled between rocky ridges. In the center stood a sturdy cabin, smoke rising from its chimney. Relief washed over her like a physical force, nearly bringing her to her knees. Gathering her last reserves of strength, Winifred stumbled toward the cabin. As she approached, a man emerged, elderly but straight-backed, with a full beard as white as the snow around them, and sharp eyes that immediately assessed her condition. "Help!" she called weakly. "Please!" The man McAllister, she presumed, reached her just as her legs gave out. Strong hands caught her before she hit the ground. "Easy, miss," he said, his voice gruff but kind. "Let's get you inside." Once in the warm cabin, Winifred's words tumbled out in a rush. Wade's injury, the infection, the cave where she'd left him. McAllister listened without interruption, his expression grave. "Dawson, you say?" he asked when she finished. "Tall fellow, blue eyes, scar on his right hand?" "Yes," Winifred confirmed, hope rising. "You know him?" "Patched him up a time or two." McAllister moved to gather supplies, packing them efficiently into a leather bag. "He's a good man in a bad spot, from what I gather. Can you help him?" The old doctor nodded. "I'll try, but we need to move fast if the infection's as bad as you describe." He glanced out the window at the darkening sky. "Can't go to night storms coming in, and we'd never find the cave in the dark. We leave at first light." Winifred wanted to protest the delay, but knew he was right. Instead, she accepted the food and dry clothes he offered, collapsing into exhausted sleep shortly after eating. They set out before dawn, McAllister leading a sturdy mountain pony loaded with supplies. The doctor moved with surprising agility for his age, setting a pace that Winifred struggled to match despite her rest. "How do you know Wade?" she asked as they traveled, partly from curiosity and partly to distract herself from the biting cold. McAllister was silent for a long moment. "Met him 5 years back in Wyoming. He brought in a young Shoshone boy who'd been shot by cattle rustlers. Rode 3 days with the boy across his saddle to find me. Did the boy live? He did. The doctor glanced at her. Dawson stayed until the boy was well enough to travel, then took him back to his people. Not many white men would do that in these parts. By midday they had covered most of the distance back to the cave, but Winifred was increasingly anxious. What if Jenkins's men had found Wade? What if the fever had worsened beyond help? Her fears intensified when they reached the area where she believed the cave to be, only to find that the fresh snow had altered the landscape, making landmarks unrecognizable. It was here, she insisted, turning in circles. I'm certain it was here. McAllister surveyed the area calmly. Caves like you described usually form along ridgelines. Let's work our way along this one. For nearly an hour they searched, Winifred growing more frantic with each passing minute. Then, just as despair threatened to overwhelm her, she spotted a familiar formation of rocks. There! She cried, rushing forward to brush away the snow-covered branches she had placed to conceal the entrance. The cave was dark and cold. The fire had long since died out. For a terrible moment, Winifred thought they were too late. Then her eyes adjusted to the dimness, and she saw Wade still lying where she had left him, wrapped in the blanket, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Wade, she called softly, kneeling beside him. Wade, I've brought help. His eyelids fluttered but didn't open. His skin burned against her touch. McAllister was already unpacking his supplies, lighting a small lantern to illuminate the cave. Move aside, miss, he directed, his voice now all business. Let me see what we're dealing with. The examination was quick and thorough. Blood poisoning, the doctor confirmed grimly. We need to clean the wound properly and get medicine into him, but I won't lie to you, it's bad. Will he live? Winifred asked directly. McAllister's eyes were compassionate but honest. I don't know. That depends on him as much as anything I can do. The next hours were a blur of activity. McAllister reopened the wound to drain the infection, a procedure that would have been agonizing had Wade been fully conscious. As it was, he moaned and thrashed weakly, forcing Winifred to hold him still while the doctor worked. The break is clean at least, McAllister said, as he reset the bone properly. If he survives the infection, the leg should heal well. If. The word hung in the air between them. By evening they had done all they could. The wound was cleaned and rebandaged, medicine administered, and a proper fire built to warm the cave. McAllister prepared a broth from supplies he'd brought, which they managed to get Wade to swallow in small amounts. Now we wait, the doctor said, settling back against the cave wall. Tonight we'll tell the tale. If he makes it till morning, his chances improve. Winifred nodded, taking up her position beside Wade, bathing his forehead with cool cloths as she had done the night before. McAllister watched her with knowing eyes. You care for him, he observed. She didn't deny it. I do. Known him long? No, she admitted. Less than 2 weeks, but... She struggled to find the words. He tried to save me when he could barely save himself. That says something about a man. McAllister nodded. That it does. He was quiet for a moment. He's been alone a long time, running from something, though he never said what. He mentioned trouble in Wyoming. The doctor's expression grew somber. Bad business, that was. Cattle Baron tried to force out smaller ranchers. Wade stood with the little men. There was violence. Deaths on both sides. When it was over, Wade had a price on his head, not legal, but dangerous nonetheless. Is that why he lives alone in the wilderness? Partly. McAllister stoked the fire. Some men just carry too much inside them to be comfortable around others. Through the night, Wade's condition wavered. Twice his fever spiked so high that Winifred feared they would lose him, but each time he rallied. By dawn, as McAllister had predicted, a change came over him, his breathing steadied, and the burning heat of his skin began to subside. He's turning the corner, the doctor announced after checking his patient. Not out of danger yet, but fighting back. Winifred sagged with relief, only now realizing how tightly she had been holding herself together. Get some rest, McAllister advised. I'll watch him for a while. She must have dozed off, for when she next opened her eyes, the quality of light in the cave had changed, suggesting late afternoon. Wade was awake, his blue eyes clear as they met hers. You came back, he said, his voice weak but lucid. Winifred moved to his side, joy flooding through her. "Of course I did." "Told you she was stubborn," Wade said to someone behind her, and Winifred turned to see McAllister sitting by the fire, a slight smile visible beneath his beard. "So you did," the doctor agreed. "Lucky for you." Over the next days, Wade's recovery was slow but steady. The infection receded, and his strength began to return incrementally. McAllister stayed for 3 days, then announced he needed to return to his cabin. "I've left medicines and instructions," he told Winifred. "Keep the wound clean, make sure he eats, and don't let him put weight on that leg for at least another 3 weeks." "I understand." She walked with him to the cave entrance. "How can I ever repay you?" The old doctor's eyes crinkled. "Just keep that fool alive. He's one of the good ones, even if he doesn't know it." After McAllister's departure, Winifred and Wade settled into a new routine. She would venture out daily to check traps the doctor had set, gather wood, and bring snow to melt for water. Wade, forced to remain in the cave, worked on fashioning a new crutch and carving wooden utensils to replace those lost in the cabin fire. Their conversations grew deeper, more personal. Wade told her about his childhood in Texas, the death of his parents when he was 14, and his years drifting from ranch to ranch, learning the cowboy trade. He spoke of the range war in Wyoming, where he had seen good men die for the crime of wanting to keep their land, and of his disillusionment with a justice system that favored the wealthy and powerful. In turn, Winifred shared her dreams of someday becoming a teacher, of her love for literature, and of the independence she had tasted briefly while working in St. Louis before her parents' deaths. She spoke of her fear of being controlled, whether by her uncle or by Jenkins, and of her determination to make her own way in the world. "You're braver than most men I know," Wade told her one evening, as they shared a rabbit stew she had prepared. "Not brave," she demurred, "just stubborn." His laugh was warm in the firelit cave. "That too." As November deepened toward December, the weather grew increasingly harsh. Snow fell heavily, sometimes for days at a time, making it difficult for Winifred to venture far from the cave. Game became scarcer, and their provisions dwindled despite careful rationing. "We can't stay here much longer," Wade said one night as they huddled close to the fire, the wind howling outside. "We'll starve before spring." "Your leg isn't healed enough for travel," Winifred argued. "It's better," he countered, demonstrating by standing with the aid of his crutch. "I can manage if we take it slow." "To where? The cabin is gone, and Jenkins' men are probably still watching McAllister's place." Wade was quiet for a moment. "There's a place I know, about 20 miles west. Old mining town called Silver Creek. Mostly abandoned now, but a few folks still live there. People who don't ask questions. 20 miles through mountain terrain in winter?" Winifred looked skeptical. "We can do it in 3 days, maybe 4, he insisted. "There's an old miner's hut halfway that we can shelter in." Winifred wanted to argue further, but the logic was undeniable. Their food would last perhaps another week. After that, starvation would become a real threat. "When do we leave?" she asked. "Tomorrow, if the snow holds off." Fortune favored them the next day with clear skies, though the temperature remained bitterly cold. They packed what little they had, the medicines and bandages, the few tools Wade had made, and their remaining food. Wade fashioned crude snowshoes for them both, from flexible branches and strips of hide from the animals they had trapped, making it easier to traverse the deep snow. Their progress was painfully slow. Wade could manage only a few hundred yards before needing to rest, the exertion clearly taking a toll despite his determination. Winifred stayed close to his side, ready to support him when his strength flagged. By midday they had covered perhaps 3 miles, far less than Wade had hoped. Dark clouds were gathering again to the west, promising more snow before nightfall. "We should find shelter," Winifred suggested, noting Wade's increased pallor. He nodded, too exhausted to argue. "There's a stand of pines ahead, better protection than open ground." They reached the pine grove just as the first snowflakes began to fall. Working together, they created a makeshift shelter, using fallen branches to construct a lean-to against a large tree trunk. It was crude but would provide some protection from the worsening weather. As darkness fell, the storm intensified. Wind drove snow through the gaps in their shelter, and the temperature plummeted. They huddled together for warmth, sharing the single blanket they had brought from the cave. "I'm sorry," Wade said, his voice barely audible above the howling wind. "I shouldn't have pushed us to leave today." "We had no choice," Winifred reminded him. "We'll reach the hut tomorrow." But by morning, conditions had worsened dramatically. A full blizzard now raged, reducing visibility to mere feet and making travel nearly impossible. They remained in their shelter, rationing their food and conserving energy. For 2 days, the storm continued unabated. When it finally broke on the third morning, they emerged to find a transformed landscape. Snowdrifts taller than Winifred in places, familiar landmarks buried or altered beyond recognition. Wade studied their surroundings, his expression grave. "I'm not sure I can find the miner's hut now. Everything looks different." Fear crept into Winifred's heart, but she kept her voice steady. "Then we continue towards Silver Creek. We've rested. We can make better time today." He looked at her with something like wonder. "You never give up, do you?" "Not when there's something worth fighting for," she replied, meeting his gaze directly. Something shifted in Wade's eyes, a softening, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. He reached out, his gloved hand gently touching her cheek. "Winnie," he said softly, "if we get out of this alive, there's something I need to tell you." "Tell me now," she urged, but he shook his head. "Let's focus on surviving first." They set out with renewed determination, Wade setting the direction using the position of the sun. The going was even more difficult than before, the deep snow making each step an effort. By midday they had covered perhaps 2 miles. "Look," Winifred said suddenly, pointing ahead. "Smoke." Sure enough, a thin column of smoke rose into the clear blue sky, perhaps a half-mile ahead of them. Wade stared at it, puzzled. "That's not where the miner's hut should be," he said. "We're not that far along the trail yet." "Someone else, then," Winifred suggested. "Trappers, maybe?" Wade's expression grew cautious. "Maybe, or Jenkins's men. They might have set up camps to search the area." "We can't stay out here another night," Winifred pointed out. "Our food is almost gone, and the temperature will drop again after dark." After a moment's consideration, Wade nodded. "We'll approach carefully. If it looks like trouble, we'll find another way." They moved forward with increased caution, Wade leading despite his injured leg. As they drew closer, they could make out a small cabin nestled against a rocky outcropping, partially sheltered from the wind. "Wait here," Wade whispered when they were about 100 yards away. "Let me get closer, see who's there. Your leg?" "I'll be fine," he insisted, handing her the pack he carried. "If anything happens, head northeast toward McAllister's. Don't wait for me." Before she could protest further, he was moving forward, using the scattered trees for cover. Winifred watched anxiously as he approached the cabin, disappearing from her sight as he circled around to the side. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Just as Winifred was considering following him, Wade reappeared, waving her forward. Relief flooded through her as she made her way to him as quickly as the snow would allow. "It's safe," he told her when she reached his side. "An old trapper named Harlan. I've met him before. He trades with McAllister sometimes." The cabin's owner stood in the doorway, an ancient man with a weathered face and a long gray beard. He nodded to Winifred, gesturing them both inside without speaking. The interior was cramped but blessedly warm, with a fire burning in a stone hearth and furs covering the walls for insulation. The old man motioned for them to sit by the fire, then set about preparing a pot of coffee. "Harlan doesn't talk much," Wade explained in a low voice. "Hasn't for years, from what McAllister told me, but he's trustworthy." The trapper served them coffee in tin cups, then produced a pot of stew that had been simmering over the fire. It was the best meal Winifred had tasted in weeks. Venison, with wild onions and some kind of roots, hearty and filling. As they ate, Wade explained their situation to Harlan through a combination of words and gestures. The old man listened impassively, then nodded and pointed to a map tacked to the wall, a hand-drawn chart of the surrounding mountains. Moving to the map, he indicated their current position, then traced a route westward with his gnarled finger. When he reached a point about midway to Silver Creek, he stopped and looked at Wade questioningly. "The miner's hut," Wade confirmed. "Yes, that's where we were heading." Harlan shook his head and made a sweeping motion with his hand. "Gone?" Wade asked. "The hut is gone?" The old man nodded, then pantomimed a snowslide. "Avalanche," Winifred translated. "When?" Harlan held up 2 fingers. 2 weeks ago, Wade said grimly. If we'd reached it, the implications didn't need stating. If they had reached the hut only to find it destroyed, stranded in the open mountains, they likely wouldn't have survived. The trapper continued tracing the route to Silver Creek, then made a walking motion with his fingers, followed by holding up 5 fingers. 5 days' journey from here, Winifred guessed. Harlan nodded, then pointed to Wade's leg and shook his head. Too far for me in this condition, Wade agreed reluctantly. The old man considered for a moment, then walked to a corner of the cabin and pulled out something covered in canvas. Unwrapping it revealed a crude sled, the kind trappers use to transport heavy loads over snow. Wade understood immediately. You're offering to take us to Silver Creek? Harlan nodded, then pointed to Winifred and made a stirring motion over an imaginary pot, followed by patting his stomach appreciatively. I think he wants me to cook for him in exchange, Winifred said, smiling. The arrangement was quickly settled. They would rest for 2 days at the cabin, allowing Wade to regain strength and Winifred to prepare provisions for the journey. Then Harlan would guide them to Silver Creek, using the sled to transport Wade when the terrain became too difficult. During those 2 days of respite, a subtle change occurred between Winifred and Wade. Perhaps it was the relative security of the cabin, or the near miss with the avalanche miner's hut. But a new awareness seemed to exist between them, lingering glances, the brush of hands as they worked together, conversations that trailed into comfortable silences laden with unspoken feelings. On the evening before their planned departure, Wade found Winifred outside the cabin, watching the sunset paint the snow-covered mountains with rose and gold. He stood beside her, his weight supported by the new crutch Harlan had helped him fashion. Beautiful, isn't it? She said softly. Yes, he agreed, though his eyes were on her profile rather than the landscape. Winifred turned to face him, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. You said there was something you wanted to tell me, if we survived. Wade's expression grew serious. There is. He took a deep breath. Winnie, when you found me in that cabin, I was more than just broken in body. I was empty. Years of running, of fighting other people's battles, of never belonging anywhere, it hollows a man out. He shifted his weight, wincing slightly as he adjusted his stance. Then you came along and refused to leave, stubborn as you are. You risked your life for mine, not once, but many times. And somewhere along the way, something happened that I didn't expect. What was that? Winifred asked, her heart beating faster despite the cold. I found something worth living for again. His voice was low, intimate. Someone worth changing for. He reached out, taking her gloved hand in his. I know I have nothing to offer you. I'm a broken-down cowboy with enemies and not a dollar to my name. But if we make it through this, if we reach Silver Creek and find safety there, I want the chance to be the kind of man who deserves someone like you. Tears pricked Winifred's eyes, not from sadness, but from a surging wave of emotion. Wade Dawson, she said, her voice slightly unsteady. You already are that man. You have been since the moment you tried to send me away to safety while you faced Jenkins's men alone. She stepped closer, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest. I don't need money or promises of an easy life. I just need someone who sees me for who I am, who respects my choices, who fights alongside me instead of trying to control me. Is that all? He asked with a slight smile, though his eyes remained serious. And who looks at me the way you're looking at me right now? She added softly. The distance between them closed, his lips finding hers in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened, warming them despite the frigid air around them. When they finally parted, Wade rested his forehead against hers. I've been wanting to do that for a long time, he admitted. Why didn't you? Didn't think I had the right. Still not sure I do. Winifred smiled. I just gave you the right. Their moment was interrupted by Harlan, who emerged from the cabin and made an exaggerated coughing sound. When they turned to look at him, he pointed to the darkening sky and then to the door, clearly suggesting they should come inside before the temperature dropped further. Wade laughed, a sound of genuine happiness that Winifred realized she had rarely heard from him. We're coming, old man, he called, just enjoying the view. That night, as they prepared for sleep, Harlan in his bed, Wade and Winifred on pallets near the fire, Wade reached for Winifred's hand in the darkness. When we reach Silver Creek, he whispered, Would you consider staying with me?" "I thought that was already decided," she replied, squeezing his hand. The journey to Silver Creek began at dawn the next day. Harlan had prepared the sled, lining it with furs and securing their supplies. Though Wade initially protested riding while the others walked, the first steep incline convinced him of the necessity. Progress was slow but steady. Harlan knew the mountains intimately, choosing routes that avoided the worst of the snowdrifts and potential avalanche areas. By nightfall of the first day, they had covered nearly 7 miles, an impressive distance given the conditions. They made camp beneath a rock overhang, building a fire that was sheltered from the wind. As they ate a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, Winifred noticed Harlan watching her, and Wade with knowing eyes. "Is something wrong?" she asked the old man. In response, he reached inside his coat and pulled out a small pouch, emptying its contents into his palm, a simple gold ring, tarnished with age. He held it out to Wade, then pointed between him and Winifred, his meaning clear. Wade looked startled. "You're offering us your wedding ring?" Harlan nodded, then touched his chest over his heart, followed by making a flying motion with his hand, as if something were leaving him. "Your wife is gone?" Winifred guessed gently. The old man nodded, his weathered face showing a moment of deep sorrow. He had been alone in these mountains for a long time. They realized perhaps decades. Wade hesitated, then accepted the ring with obvious emotion. "Thank you. This means more than I can say." Harlan smiled, then made a shooing gesture, pointing at the two of them and then away from the fire, apparently suggesting they take a moment of privacy. Leading Winifred a short distance away, still within sight of the fire but out of earshot, Wade looked down at the ring in his palm. "This wasn't how I planned to do this," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "I was thinking maybe after we reached Silver Creek, got established a bit." "Do what?" Winifred asked, though she suspected she knew. Instead of answering immediately, Wade took her hand. "Winnie, I know this is fast, maybe too fast. We've only known each other a couple of months, and most of that time has been running or hiding or just trying to survive." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But I've lived long enough to know that sometimes life doesn't give you second chances. Sometimes you have to recognize what matters and hold on to it with both hands." Meeting her eyes directly, he continued, "I love you, Winifred Ellis. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you refused to leave me, when you said you'd go when I could walk. I want to build a life with you, wherever that may be. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want to be your partner in everything." He held up the ring. "I know I'm not much of a catch-a-broken-down cowboy with nothing to his name, but if you'll have me, I promise to spend every day trying to be the man you deserve." Tears blurred Winifred's vision, but she didn't look away from his earnest gaze. "Wade Dawson, when I left my uncle's house, I was running away from a life where I had no choices, where I was treated as property to be traded. I never expected to run towards something, towards someone who would see me as an equal, who would value my strength instead of trying to diminish it." She took a deep breath. "Yes, I'll marry you. Not because I need a husband or protection, but because I want you stubborn, honorable, broken bits and all." Wade's smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It was too large, but she closed her hand around it, determined not to lose this symbol of their commitment. The kiss they shared was different from their first deeper, filled with promise and future plans rather than uncertain hopes. When they returned to the fire, Harlan took one look at their faces and nodded with satisfaction. The remainder of the journey to Silver Creek passed without major incident. On the afternoon of the 4th day, they crested a ridge to see the settlement spread below them, a cluster of wooden buildings nestled in a protected valley, thin streams of smoke rising from chimneys. "We made it," Winifred breathed, relief washing over her. Wade, who had been walking for the past mile with the aid of his crutch, put his arm around her shoulders. Together. Harlan led them down into the valley as the light began to fade. Silver Creek had clearly seen better days. Many of the buildings were abandoned, their windows dark and shuttered, but several showed signs of habitation, with lamplight glowing behind curtained windows and horses in paddocks. The old trapper headed directly for the largest building, a 2-story structure with a sign identifying it as the Prospector's Rest. Inside, they found a saloon and inn combined, sparsely populated but warm and inviting after their days in the wilderness. The proprietor, a stout woman with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun, looked up as they entered, her eyes widening at the sight of Harlan. "Well, I'll be," she exclaimed. "Harlan Jenkins, as I live and breathe. Haven't seen you in 3 winters at least." Winifred and Wade exchanged startled glances at the surname, but the woman was already moving toward them. "Friends of Harlan's are friends of mine," she said, extending a hand. "Martha Wilkins. I run this establishment." "Wade Dawson," Wade replied, shaking her hand. "And this is Winifred Ellis, my fiancée." The words sent a warm thrill through Winifred despite their circumstances. "You look half frozen, and that leg needs tending," Martha observed bluntly. "Come on back. I've got rooms available and stew on the stove." As she led them through the saloon, Winifred couldn't help asking, "Jenkins? Is Harlan related to Bartholomew Jenkins from Billings?" Martha snorted. "His brother, though they haven't spoken in 30 years. Bad blood there. Bart always was a greedy one, even as a boy." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. They had been helped to safety by the brother of the very man hunting them. Once settled in a small but clean room, with Wade's leg rebandaged and hot food in their stomachs, they finally allowed themselves to believe they might have reached safety. Harlan had departed after a silent farewell, heading back to his mountain cabin, despite Martha's invitation to stay. "What now?" Winifred asked as they sat by the fire in their room. "Now we rest," Wade replied, reaching for her hand. "Then we figure out how to make a life here." "Do you think Jenkins will keep looking for us?" Wade considered the question. "For a while, maybe, but winter makes the mountains near impassable. By spring, who knows? Men like him usually find new obsessions." The next weeks proved him right. No pursuit materialized, and gradually they settled into life in Silver Creek. The town was a shadow of its former self. Most of the mines had played out years ago, leaving only a handful of residents who preferred isolation to the bustle of larger settlements. Wade's leg healed steadily, though he would always walk with a slight limp. He found work as a blacksmith's assistant, learning the trade that would eventually allow him to open his own shop. Winifred, with her education, began teaching the few children in town, using a corner of the church as her classroom. They were married on Christmas Day 1878, in that same small church, with Martha Wilkins standing witness alongside the town's aging preacher. Winifred wore a dress of deep blue wool that Martha had helped her sew, and Wade stood straight and tall without his crutch for the first time since his fall. As they spoke their vows, snow fell softly outside, blanketing the town in pristine white that mirrored the new beginning they had found together. The gold ring that Harlan had given them, now properly sized for Winifred's finger, gleamed in the candlelight as Wade slipped it on. "I'll go when you can walk," Winifred had said months ago in a burning cabin. Now, Wade could walk, and they were going forward together into whatever future awaited them. Spring came to Silver Creek, bringing with it new growth and possibilities. The snow melted from the passes, making travel possible again. But no pursuers appeared. Perhaps Jenkins had indeed found a new obsession, or perhaps he had concluded that a woman who would flee rather than marry him wasn't worth the trouble of retrieving. On a warm May evening, Wade and Winifred sat on the porch of the small cabin they now called home, built with their own hands on the outskirts of town, with a garden starting to flourish under Winifred's care and a proper blacksmith's forge where Wade worked his trade. "I got a letter today," Wade said, watching the sunset paint the western mountains with gold. "From McAllister?" "Is he well?" Winifred asked, looking up from the book she was reading. "He is. Says Harlan visited him last month, which is apparently unusual." Wade smiled. "Also says he's thinking of moving to Silver Creek come fall. Says he's getting too old for complete solitude." "That would be wonderful," Winifred said warmly. "We could use a doctor here." Wade was quiet for a moment, his hand finding hers. "He also sent news from Billings. Your uncle passed away in March. Apparently, his business finally collapsed entirely." Winifred absorbed this information, surprised by her lack of strong emotion. "And Jenkins? Married a widow from Helena. Seems he found someone else to make him respectable after all." "Good," she said simply. "That chapter is truly closed then." Wade squeezed her hand. "Are you ever sorry? That you ended up here, I mean. You could have had a different life. Winifred set her book aside and moved to sit on his lap, her arms encircling his neck. A life not of my choosing? No, I'm not sorry. She kissed him softly. Besides, I have news of my own to share. Wade raised an eyebrow questioningly. Dr. McAllister won't be the only new arrival in Silver Creek this year, she said, taking his hand and placing it gently against her stomach. If my calculations are correct, we should expect our own newcomer around November. The joy that spread across Wade's face was answer enough. He pulled her close, burying his face against her neck for a moment to hide the tears that sprang to his eyes. A family, he whispered. Our family. Yes, Winifred agreed, her own eyes damp. Our family. As twilight deepened around them, they remained on the porch, talking quietly of the future of the child who would join them, of the town that was slowly growing as word spread of the blacksmith and teacher who had made a home there, of the life they were building day by day. Later, as they prepared for bed, Wade watched Winifred brushing her hair by lamplight. "Do you remember what I said that day at Harlan's cabin?" he asked. "About being hollow before I met you?" She nodded, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "I need you to know something," he continued. "I'm not hollow anymore. You didn't just heal my body, Winnie. You healed parts of me I thought were broken beyond repair." Winifred set down her brush and turned to face him. "And you gave me something I never thought I'd have, not just love, but partnership. A life where my voice matters as much as yours. Always," he promised, drawing her into his arms. "Always." Their daughter, Sarah, was born on a snowy night in late November, with Dr. McAllister now, a permanent resident of Silver Creek, attending the birth. She had her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined chin, and from her first cry, it was clear she had inherited the stubborn streak that had brought her parents together. As Wade held his daughter for the first time, standing on two strong legs beside the bed where Winifred rested, he marveled at the journey that had brought them here. From a broken cowboy lying helpless in a cabin to a husband, soon-to-be father, and respected member of a community, all because one woman had refused to leave when he told her to go. "Thank you," he whispered, bending to kiss Winifred's forehead, "for staying when I said go." She smiled up at him, tired but radiant. "I told you I'd go when you could walk." "And now?" he asked, gently placing their daughter in her arms. "Now," Winifred said, looking from her husband to her child, with love that seemed too vast for her body to contain. "Now we walk together." And so they did, for all the days that followed.